welcome to Turn the Page, the official podcast of the Syosset Public Library.
Hi, this is Jessica with Syosset Library's Turn the Page podcast. I'm your host today, and I'm super looking forward to chatting about this book. It is called The Great Game, which might be calling back some Sherlock lore to you, and it should, but that's definitely not the depth of this book, even though you're definitely picking up on some of it, but it goes so much deeper than that. So before we talk any more about the Great Game, I'm going to ask our guest to introduce himself and tell us a little bit about his background and why he decided or when he decided to write this book.
Hi, Jessica. Thank you. Happy to be here. Always happy to talk to librarians. My mother started her career as a librarian, and so it always resonates with me. My name's Arvind Ethan David. I'm the author of The Great Game. And I come to novels sort of late in my career. I have worked in film, television, and theater for most of my life. I'm a playwright, I'm a television writer and producer, and I'm a graphic novelist. But sort of slightly by accident, I've become a novelist because I had written a series of Audible originals for Audible sort of audio dramas, full cast things. And then they were looking at making a volume of short stories out of them. And my agent said to me, you only have 7, you need 3 more short stories. And I was like, okay, here are some 1-pagers. And I did that thing that working writers have to do. I generated a bunch of 1-story pitches. Honestly, I thought they were interesting ideas, but they took the time that 1-story pitches take. And then the editorial director at Amazon Publishing, Kirsty Egredal, called me and she said, I read your pitches and I think this one wants to be a novel. And I went, oh, does it? And I looked at it again and I went, oh, you're right, it does. And so that's how The Great Game happened. But I guess in a deeper sense, it's a reflection of my long love and obsession with Victorian Edwardian adventure literature. I was born in Asia. I was born in Malaysia and grew up in Malaysia and Singapore. But then I moved to the UK as a young person, and really my earliest memories as a reader, Arthur Conan Doyle and H.G. Wells and E.W. Hornung and J.M. Barrie and the sort of greats of the early 20th century. And I love those books. I love them as a young boy. I love them now. But I'm also a person of color. I'm a brown man. I'm an Indian ethnically. And I'm like, where are my people in these books? And so The Great Game is amongst other things, it's an attempt to answer that question.
So one thing that I didn't come to The Great Game knowing about, and now I do, are the Bunny and Raffles stories. I was not aware of them. Obviously, maybe it's an American thing. We know about Sherlock Holmes, to a lesser degree, Arsène Lupin, because as an anime fan, I'm like, oh, Lupin the Third. And then, you kind of go back and you're just like, oh, no, wait, this is a literary figure. Which also had sort of a weird connection with Sherlock Holmes, but we can sidestep that because that's a whole other conversation. But I was not familiar with Bunny and Sing. Bunny, Sing is actually Bunny's or Balvinder's last name in your book. But originally, so Bunny and Sing were characters, literary characters, and they almost had like a Holmesean and Watson type relationship where one was sort of like telling the story of the other. In your book, the story is told from Balvinder Singh's point of view, who is known by A.J. Raffles, who is a gentleman thief, as Bunny. However, in the original text, they were both white. Am I
Yeah.
correct?
So
Yeah.
so it's a great story. So in their time, Raffles, the gentleman cracksman, and his associate Bunny Manders were every bit as famous as their doppelgangers Holmes and Watson. The stories start coming out in the early 1900s, late 1890s, early 1900s. They become huge bestsellers, genuinely second only to the Sherlock Holmes stories. And in the 50 or 60 years after that, they are perpetually adapted as radio, television, and movies. David Niven famously plays Raffles in a wonderful film, which is sort of a precursor of To Catch a Thief. And there's a couple of extraordinary things about this. The first is that they are created by E.W. Hornung, who is Conan Doyle's brother-in-law. He's married to Conan Doyle's sister. And unquestionably, it's a tribute and a rip-off of his famous brother-in-law's creations. He dedicates the first novel to ACD, Arthur Conan Doyle, this form of flattery, i.e. theft is a form of flattery. But they are also, and this is, I think, as fascinating, Hornung was friends with Oscar Wilde and Bosie, Lord Alfred Douglas. And so they are also very much based on Wilde and Bosie. And they have in them, not explicitly, but not far from the surface, that homoerotic bond that is, a sort of established by Wilde as a sort of coded way of writing about male love, about homosexual love in the period. And so they're fascinating characters. And the strangest thing about them is how they disappear, having gone from incredibly famous to just disappearing in about the 80s, 70s, 80s. It's not an American thing. No one in England has heard about them either. They just vanished from being legendary to being to vanish. It just goes to show we authors don't get to choose how long our creations last. But I've always loved them. And it felt a fun way to bring them back, but then to reinvent them for the new era and to sort of interrogate not just them, but interrogate the whole form of the Edwardian adventure novel.
And I mean, in a way, it had like that thrill of reading like a big crossover, because you do bring a lot of your favorites into it as well. And Bunny, he kind of introduces himself. You find out, he's a lawyer, or rather, studying law. He lives in Britain, but you start to, he tells you after the fact, also, I'm a Sikh, I'm a man of color. And he's not able to maneuver things as well as, I wouldn't say as well, but as easily as Raffles is, for instance, who has a lot of privilege. And like, one of the things I thought was just so brilliant and so much fun about reading this novel was how you rolled out these issues and the conversation about privilege and colonialism with it, sort of like you meet Bunny first and then you're experiencing it through his eyes, but with all of these larger than life figures around him. And he becomes larger than life as the story continues and as you sort of see him working through all of this, or working with everything kind of working against him, whereas he is every bit as intelligent and as witty as his I guess his counterparts. So where did that part of the story sort of come into for you? You drop a lot of history very well into the story, about just relations in Britain and England with the Sikh people. Where did this all sort of kind of come together? We are just like, okay, this is how I'm going to start telling this particular story.
So when I started writing it, and this will sound either like I'm an idiot or disingenuous, it's genuinely neither. In those first page that just read that my agent asked me to write, I didn't know that Bunny wasn't going to be the old Bunny. I was writing the old Bunny. And then when I got 5 pages in, I'm like, I can't write the old Bunny. I'm not the old Bunny. He's an idiot. Also, this is the other problem with the old Bunny. He's perpetually being bamboozled and being duped and being taken advantage of. And I'm like, I don't know how to write that character. That's I'm good. I can't make that leap. I'm sorry. Not as my point of view character. And so then I was like, okay, so who is my Bunny? And then Balvinder really arrived because his reality of navigating the various strata of British society is the reality of any person of color in his situation. And it's my reality, and I mean, I haven't had to see off a global terrorist organization or yet. But my brother was at school and bullied by Winston Churchill's great grandsons. I have been in rooms with cabinet ministers where the only reason I am there is my color, because they want a diverse representative to have a point of view. I have been to elite Pall Mall gentlemen's clubs, members clubs, where I have been chastised by waiters for loosening my tie or suggesting that I might want to take off my jacket because it's too hot. So this is a world I know. And I know it from my own experience, but then I also know it from knowing the literature. So for example, there is a lot of colonial and empire influence in the Sherlock Holmes stories. One of the first Sherlock Holmes stories, The Sign of the Four, has its entire backstory, and three of the infamous Sign of the Four are Indians. But they're the bad guys. And worse, they're the bad guys that aren't even correctly described, named, understood. Conan Doyle, who was a brilliant, erudite, traveled man, can't even be bothered to get their religions and names right. So he has a character who is, called Muhammad Singh. I'm like, how do you have a character called Muhammad Singh? So you see, he's Muslim and he's Punjabi. That doesn't work. He can't be both. He can't be a Muslim Sikh. He can't be a Muslim Punjabi, but he can't be a Muslim Sikh. So I found that a way in. And so I have Bunny confront Watson with this in the book, and it makes, I hope, for a funny set piece where he takes Watson to task for his inaccuracy and his ignorance. But you're right, he is constrained, and these are constraints that people don't write about in these stories or think about. Like, he can't even get into the Garrick, the club that Raffles is a member of, because he's not a member, nor would he ever be a member, because he would be, and I think I cut this out, he would be blackballed. So that just seemed an interesting set of impediments to place in the way of a detective, to place in the way of someone trying to solve a problem, that those issues wouldn't be there for Sherlock. They're not there for Raffles, but they're there if you're not an insider. At the same time, he can do things and think things and say things that nobody else can, because he has his own perspective.
I can tell, that the serious undertones aside, that you had a lot of fun writing this book. It does not go in any direction I was expecting it to, and saying anything more than that is a spoiler. But really, like, every new part of it, and every, with every famous name that we're introduced to, or literary character, or just in general, like, every door that's opened, it just sort of grows, and everything just seems so much bigger and so much more fun and vibrant. And I really was just delighted just reading this whole story and just reading, you have a really good way with wordplay. You clearly, like you mentioned, you clearly love these characters, but you really just made it your own. And yeah, do you want to talk a little bit about just sort of the writing process? I mean, please tell me if you didn't have fun, and then I will eat my words and I'll be like, oops, sorry. But I
No,
could really tell, like, there was just some genuine love of the whole genre and the characters in every page.
thank you. First, thank you for seeing that. It's nice that it comes across. And you're absolutely right. I can't make you eat any words. This was a blast to write. I have written, a lot of television, a number of plays, a lot of audio drama. When I finished this book, I cried. I was really sad to write that last page and say goodbye to Bunny for a while. Hopefully not forever. But it was enormous fun to get into his skin and to walk around this world. And in a way, this sort of metafiction is always what I've wanted to do. I've spent a lot of my life adapting the work of my heroes. I've adapted Douglas Adams, I've adapted Raymond Chandler, I've adapted Neil Gaiman, I've adapted Lenny Henry, I've collaborated with David Baddiel and Tom Stoppard and Max Landis. I've spent a lot of my time playing in the sandboxes of others. And I'm hugely grateful for that experience, and I'm very proud of some of the things we've made that way. This was different because this wasn't just playing in someone else's sandbox. This was me taking it over. This was me saying, all right, this is mine for a while, and putting my own creations into it and making it answer my questions. And that was fun. But most fun of all was Bunny. And you're right, this is, whatever its vaguely serious political or literary intent, it is, in essence, a sort of crazy adventure thriller. It has murders, it has grotesque and macabre crimes, it has mysterious supernatural figures. It has all of that. And it has, I hope, a very satisfying murder, mystery, thriller plot driving it forward that turns into a sort of spy terrorist caper. So all that stuff is fun. But most fun of all for me, and hopefully for the reader, is Bunny's voice. Because Bunny is, I think of, there are these creations, there are these traditions, I think particularly in British literature, of these characters. Sherlock is obviously one. I would say, Jeeves is another. Winnie the Pooh, always. Douglas Adams is Arthur Dent. That once you have them, Douglas Adams is Dirk Gently, with whom I have great experience. Once you have them, they are so precise, they are so perfectly drawn, they are so themselves, and they are unique that you can place them in any situation, and there's no question what they will do. They will act according to their stars. And I'd like to think, and time will tell, only time will tell, that Bunny, at least for me, sits in that tradition. Bunny is always, my Bunny, Balvinder, is always himself. And it doesn't mean he always gets things right. He gets some things hopelessly wrong, as he does with Maud Adler in this book. But he's a hopeless romancer, whatever his other strengths. He is no good with the ladies. But he always knows who he is, and I always know who he is. And so it was never hard to write. I could put him anywhere, and I would know what he would do. The job, the sort of planning job, was just figuring out where to put him. Once I knew where he was, it wrote itself, or he wrote himself.
So you actually sort of answered a question I had, or I was going to do towards the end of our chat, which is ask if we're ever going to see him again. I could certainly see that there could be more to his story, again, without giving anything away and saying that this book went in directions I wasn't expecting. Could we see your Bunny again?
Well, I hope two things. I hope the book is satisfying in itself. I think it tells a story to completion. At the same time, yeah, I know what he does next. I know what he does next, and there's a conversation happening with the publisher.
It had such a good ending, but also what happens next? So yeah, I'm glad to hear that.
Yeah, in my head, there's a 3-book or 3-volume series that sort of tells the whole story, but we'll see.
Well, thank you so much. This was great. I mean, the people who've reviewed the book love it. It's gotten some really good reviews. It is so much fun, as I've said probably way too many times on this interview, but I'm going to keep saying it because it really was. I think it's going to attract the interest of a lot of people. And I'm glad to know that it's not just an American thing that that I was unaware of Raffles and Bunny, but I do hope that they get new life, or rather, Bunny gets new life through Balvinder Singh because he's really fun to read, and I could tell that he was fun for you to write, and he deserves some more story.
Thank you, Jessica. From your lips to the publishing gods.
So once again, this was Jessica with Syosset Libraries Turn the Page podcast. My guest was,
Arvind Ethan David, author of The Great Game.
and we are going to close this chapter of Turn the Page.
It's time to close this chapter of Turn the Page. Join us for the next episode.